everybody, it's Norm from Tested here at Maker Faire 2018, and of course with Shawn Thorsson, maker of costumes, armor, props. You got some big armor here you're showing at Maker Faire, Shawn.
Yeah, it's getting a little bit crowded here behind the booth. Every year I try to add something new. Failed last year, fell a little bit short, but this year, in addition to the big fallout for T-60 power armor, which we have 2 of here, I've also got a new set of Warhammer, Grey Knight armor. I've got a handful of other smaller things walking around. The goddess Thor from the comic books lately. It's a whole bunch of new shiny things.
The first time we met you here at Maker Faire, we were drawn by your massive Warhammer armor.
Yep.
You know, cosplayers in stilts, essentially, which is what Freddie here is wearing. Tell me about this T-60 Fallout armor and how this was designed and built.
Well, we started with all the same digital models that they use to render the character in the game. Once those were extracted, you have to do some cleanup because they're not really meant for fabrication.
They're
meant for animation.
not watertight, they're just a shell.
So I had to go through, close everything up. I had to decide on a scale, and all I did was I started with their 1/6 scale action figure, did the math. That thing is supposed to be 7'3" to scale, so we made this guy so he's about 7'3" to scale, depending who's wearing it, of course. And then once I had all those models watertight, had all the geometry cleaned up and smoothed out, the next step was big parts were carved out on my Carve Right CNC machines. So I've got a whole wall of those guys that were just humming nonstop for a couple of months. And then each of the parts would come out and need to be reassembled, because I have to make them in slices. So those slices get reconstituted, do some body shop work to make them into smooth things, and then they all get molded in fiberglass and then pulled in fiberglass copies. So anything that is fairly smooth, fairly large, I did, just like building a boat.
Right.
And then all of the smaller parts, which have more details, like the helmet, the fingers, these little oil can things, those were all done typically on a 3D printer because it's smaller and I don't feel like I'm wasting a lot of time on small parts. And then those parts were molded in silicone and then cast in urethane.
You're printing, you're hand sculpting, you're milling lots of big pieces, even deconstructing the game model into something that's wearable.
Yeah.
Right? Like you need to make this so the elbows are free to bend.
Yeah, we've still got a little bit of work as far as readjusting. The straps are a little bit loose, so there's too much elbow showing I'd rather not deal with. But yeah, for the most part, just figuring out how they were supposed to be able to walk around. The nice part about this, compared to the Warhammer suit, in-game, this is a normal-sized person wearing a big clunky suit of armor. So they've already got the proportions kind of worked out. So if you really look at the suit, the distance from crotch to knee is the same as a normal sized person.
It's not elongated.
Right.
Your knee can be higher up.
Exactly. Same thing. Shoulder to elbow. It's a person's shoulder to elbow. The forearm's ridiculous long, and the hands are outside the end of the person's silhouette. But it's still very achievable as far as putting a person inside and making it wearable. With the Warhammer stuff, it was a whole lot of trying to figure out how to make a 6-foot person into a 7.5-foot person.
Everything's expanded.
Yeah,
all the joints, everything's further apart. Talk about the undersuit a little bit. A lot of armor stuff.
Yeah, so in this case, this is the only parts that were actually sculpted by hand. All of the rubber parts that you see were just done in oil-based clay, and then once all the clay was the shape that I wanted, I took a mold in UltraCal 30, so it's a gypsum stone product, and then once the mold was cleaned out, it's just a question of a couple of layers of slip cast latex. It's just like making a Halloween mask.
Oh, okay. But full body.
Well, in this case, it's a big pair of goofy shorts. It goes from about knee to nipple.
Yeah.
And then the elbows and the knees, they're just flat sheets that get rolled and stuffed into place to fill the joints. It's always one of the things that bothers me when I see someone else do a really giant suit of armor. They always forget about the gaps in between.
Yeah.
So what you've got is a big, bulky, ridiculous costume, and then inside you can always see skinny little nerd arms, very visible when someone's walking around. It kind of, ruins the suspension of disbelief.
Freddie's nerd arms are well hidden in those rubber joints right there. How much movability you have, posability? Oh, pretty good. Yeah. Now, the hands here, these aren't actual hands inside.
We run out of time as far as making the hands puppeted, so all we've got is essentially armature wire that runs down the middle of them. So they are posable to some extent, but it's not something we really want to mess with too much because right now it's just a static thing so that, they'll look different from one picture to the next, but we can't really animate them real time.
And then this paint finish I love. I know you have a steel finish version. That's really cool as well. Personally, I like the kind of old car.
This one here was all Freddie. I tried to talk him into doing just another rusty steel one so that we could have kind of a matched pair.
Yeah.
And he went through 80 or 90 iterations of photoshopping the artwork from the game before deciding on this paint scheme with the blue and white. So, of course, the problem is I never make one of anything. So the next step is I'm going to go back to the shop, pull another couple sets of parts, because there's other factions in the game. I did a helmet kicking around here somewhere for what's called the Atom Cats. And in game, it's basically like a hot rod club, but instead of dressing up their cars, they dress up their power armor. So it'll be an excuse to do a flame job across the chest. It's all black and red, kind of rat rod color scheme, and still just a little bit of rust and dust and grime. So I'm looking forward to tinkering with more of these.
You're molding everything. You got massive armor here. You got your Warhammer armor. How big is your mold storage?
So I've got a 20-foot shipping container that I can't walk into anymore. There's one wall in my shop that's probably about 20 foot long, 9 feet high, 2-foot deep shelves that are completely jam-packed. It works out about once every year or so. I'll get to the point where I'm tired of climbing over things to get to stuff. Yeah. So then I'll purge the stuff that's farthest from, like the oldest things that are probably dried out and useless anyway. And then I've also gotten to the point now where I've started sliding sheets of plywood into the rafters. So all the molds for the Grey Knight currently live overhead.
You're making pieces to sell here, you do commissions, you gotta make one for yourself, of course. But for people who want to learn what you do, you also have tutorials.
Yeah. I have tutorials. I've got a blog that's, always whenever I finish a project and find time, I write things up. But yeah, this weekend, the thing that I'm selling is my book. It's Make Props and Costume Armor, published by Make. And it's geared towards folks that are working out of their garage or on their kitchen table, using materials that you can pick up at like your local hardware store or your, like big box office supply shops. So it's a whole lot of very attainable materials that kind of eliminate sort of the barriers to entry to this kind of hobby. So where thought about it when I was writing it was if I could go back and find me 15 years ago and scoot me past all of the stupid mistakes that I made back then and all the like YouTube tutorials that people posted who didn't know what they were talking about, things like that. So basically it's the, the huge jump start that I kind of wish I could have had at the beginning.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us your massive new armor. Shawn, your work continues to be an inspiration.
Thank you.
It's great to see you.
Nice to see you, Norm.